China made 39% of every humanoid robot shipped on planet Earth last year. One single Chinese company did that by itself. And this week, America's answer wasn't to build a better robot. It was to ban China's. On Tuesday, the Federal Communications Commission quietly added foreign-made humanoid robots, four-legged robot dogs, and grid power inverters to something called the covered list. If that name sounds familiar, it should. That's the exact same regulatory weapon Washington used on Huawei back when it decided Chinese telecom equipment was too dangerous to let inside American networks. As of this week, Chinese robots are officially sitting on that same list, right next to a telecom giant that got treated like a national threat. Let that sink in for a second. Robots. Not missiles, not fighter jets. Machines that vacuum warehouses and walk on two legs. And the United States government looked at them and decided they were dangerous enough to formally ban. So here's the question we're actually answering today. Is this the US protecting itself from a real, tangible threat? Or is this the US admitting out loud in an official government filing that it can't keep up in a race it used to assume it would win by default? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to see a number that will make you question which country is actually further ahead in this race, and it involves a robot that costs less than most people's laptops. Let's start with how badly China is actually winning this race, because the numbers are almost hard to believe. In 2025, the entire world shipped roughly 13,000 humanoid robots, total. Of that number, one Chinese company, AgiBot, shipped over 5,000 units by itself. That's 39% of the entire planet's humanoid robot supply, coming from a single Chinese manufacturer. Not 39% of China's output, 39% of the world's. And AgiBot isn't even necessarily the biggest name in the story. Unitree, the other Chinese humanoid giant, sold 5,500 humanoid robots of its own in 2025. And it did something almost nobody else in this industry has managed to do. It turned a real profit. Unitree posted an adjusted net profit of around $90 million last year, a jump of more than 600% from the year before. That's not a startup burning venture capital chasing a dream. That's a company that figured out how to make money selling robots at scale right now, in the real world. And here's the number that should really stop you. Unitree sells a working humanoid robot for as little as $4,290, $4,290 for a walking, working humanoid robot. You could buy one for less than a used sedan. Now compare that to America's great hope in this race. Figure AI, the leading US humanoid robot startup, raised over $1 billion last September at a $39 billion valuation. $39 billion. And by most public accounting, Figure has shipped a tiny fraction of what Unitree and AgiBot are moving every single year. One country is selling robots people can actually walk into a store and buy. The other is selling a vision, priced like a small nation's GDP, with almost nothing on the loading dock to show for it. This is the exact same playbook China ran with solar panels. The same one it ran with electric vehicles, the same one it ran with commercial drones. Get the manufacturing cost down low enough, hit real production scale fast enough, and suddenly, the rest of the world isn't just behind. It's economically priced out of catching up. So with all of that as the backdrop, here's what actually happened this week, in plain terms. The FCC's move bans new imports of foreign-made humanoid and quadruped robots, along with power inverters, the devices that convert DC electricity from solar panels and batteries into the AC power that actually runs across America's electrical grid. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr publicly welcomed the move, framing it as the commission acting in lockstep with national security agencies to protect America's critical supply chains. The decision followed a formal review by government agencies with national security expertise, convened directly under the Trump administration, and both categories, robots and power inverters, were officially designated as national security threats to the United States. It's worth understanding exactly what the covered list actually is, because most viewers hear banned and picture something far more dramatic than what's actually on paper. The covered list was created under the 2020 Secure Networks Act, and it's the mechanism the US government uses to formally identify communications and technology equipment it considers a threat to national security. Huawei and ZTE equipment went on that list years ago. effectively locking both companies out of US telecom infrastructure for good. Once something lands on the covered list, federal money can't be used to buy it, and new imports and sales face serious regulatory roadblocks. This week, for the first time ever, an entire category of robotics joined that list. That's the scale of what just happened, even if the headlines made it sound like a routine trade dispute. Here's the part most headlines are quietly burying. This ban doesn't touch robots already operating inside the US. It only blocks new models going forward. Companies can still apply for conditional approval on a case-by-case basis through the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, or through the Defense Department for robotics specifically. So this isn't a total wall slamming shut overnight. It's more like a very deliberate, very public gate closing on future access, timed at the exact moment China's humanoid robot industry is hitting its stride globally. And the power inverter piece of this story might actually matter more long-term than the robots do. Power inverters aren't some flashy sci-fi gadget. They're the quiet, unglamorous hardware sitting between your solar panels, your home battery, and the actual grid that keeps America's lights on. Banning foreign-made versions of that hardware is Washington saying out loud in a federal filing that it's genuinely worried about who controls the wiring underneath the country's energy future. That's not a robot story anymore at that point. That's a story about whether a foreign supply chain has its hand near the plug that powers your house. Think about how much of America's newer energy infrastructure actually depends on this kind of hardware. Rooftop solar installations, home battery systems, utility-scale battery farms feeding power back into regional grids, all of it runs through inverters at some stage. If a meaningful share of those components were coming from foreign manufacturers, and the government just formally labeled that a national security risk, that's a much bigger story than robots taking warehouse jobs. That's a story about whether the physical backbone of the American energy transition has a foreign kill switch built into it. It's easy to miss because it doesn't come with a flashy robot demo video, but in terms of actual national exposure, the inverter ban might end up being the more consequential half of this announcement. Now let's talk about why China's robot industry got this dominant in the first place, because none of this happened by accident. China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology says the country's humanoid robot output is on track to blow past 100,000 units this year alone. 100,000 humanoid robots produced in a single year, from a standing start just a few years ago. Shanghai has already set a public target of deploying 100,000 humanoids across the city by 2030, and officials are openly branding 2026 as the inaugural year of what they're calling embodied AI deployment, a phrase you're going to hear a lot more of over the next few years. This is coordinated, top-down industrial strategy, not a handful of garage startups getting lucky in a hot market. The penetration rate of AI applications among China's larger industrial enterprises has already crossed 30%. And the country's National AI Industry Investment Fund has been actively channeling additional capital into the sector to keep that number climbing. This is a government treating embodied AI and humanoid robotics the same way it once treated solar panels and electric vehicles, as a strategic pillar worth subsidizing, coordinating, and protecting until domestic champions are strong enough to dominate globally without help. At the World AI Conference in Shanghai this July, industry leaders stood on stage and said, plainly and publicly, that China has already taken the lead in the core areas of embodied intelligence, specifically manufacturing capacity, training data, and deployment environments. The unglamorous infrastructure that actually determines who wins a manufacturing race over the long run, not just who wins a viral demo video. And the corporate momentum backs that claim up in a big way. Unitree just fast-tracked an IPO on Shanghai's star market, originally targeting a valuation north of $6 billion, with some reports pushing that number as high as $7 billion once you factor in fresh backing from Alibaba, Tencent, and the automaker Geely. Unitree's founder, Wang Xingxing, was pulled into a rare private meeting with China's president earlier this year, sitting alongside executives from DeepSeek, the AI lab that rattled Silicon Valley at the start of last year with a model that cost a fraction of what American labs were spending. When your government puts your CEO in a room with its head of state, that tells you exactly how strategic this industry has become inside Beijing's long-term planning. And it's not stopping with just the two obvious names. AgiBot and Engine AI are both chasing separate listings in Hong Kong. Smaller players like Dobot, Deep Robotics, and Leju Robotics are all lining up behind them, hoping to ride the same wave of investor enthusiasm. Even BYD, the electric car giant that's already eating into Tesla's global market share, just confirmed it's unveiling its own first humanoid robot next month at one of its flagship experience centers. This is quickly turning into China's version of the electric vehicle boom all over again, except this time the product actually walks off the factory floor on two legs. Meanwhile, in the US, the picture looks very different. Tesla's Optimus program is still ramping toward Elon Musk's promise of retail sales by the end of 2027. Figure AI is expanding paid deployments with partners like BMW, but is still working through single-digit or low double-digit units per hour on the production line. Boston Dynamics has its Atlas platform moving into early pilots with companies like Hyundai. These are real programs with real engineering behind them, but none of them are anywhere close to shipping thousands of units a year at a $4,000 price point with a profitable balance sheet. That gap between American demo stage ambition and Chinese assembly line output is the entire reason this ban exists in the first place. And it's worth pointing out how differently the two countries are even approaching what a robot company is supposed to look like right now. Figure AI has reportedly sent cease and desist letters to brokers trying to trade its private shares on secondary markets, essentially trying to control its own valuation narrative before the public ever gets a chance to price it independently. Unitree is doing the opposite. It's walking straight into a public listing, handing over at least 10% of the company to public investors, and letting the market decide what it's worth every single day once shares start trading. One country's flagship robotics company is protecting the story. The other is opening its books. That contrast alone tells you a lot about which side actually feels confident in its numbers. Okay, now here's the twist, and it's the part that actually changes how you should read this whole story. Despite everything we just laid out, despite China dominating global shipments, despite the profit margins, despite the IPOs, despite the presidential meetings, analysts are saying this ban probably won't hurt China all that much. One analyst covering the sector for research firm Omdia said Chinese vendors were already being realistic about how much room they had left to grow inside the US market to begin with, and that many of them have been quietly shifting their attention toward Europe as their real long-term growth target instead. Given how few real alternatives currently exist to Chinese humanoid hardware, at this price point and this production volume, that same analyst expects the overall damage from this ban to end up being minimal. Europe in particular has become the obvious pressure valve. With no equivalent domestic humanoid industry of its own, and a manufacturing base hungry for automation, European buyers are exactly the kind of customer Chinese firms can redirect toward without missing a beat, and industry watchers expect that shift to happen quickly rather than gradually. And the trade data backs that reading up. China's Ministry of Commerce says the country's AI-related exports surged in the first half of 2026, calling them the new hallmark of Chinese foreign trade in official statements. Industrial robot exports were up 18.6% year over year. 3D printer exports, a category most people aren't even watching closely, were up over 109% in the same period. China isn't just relying on the American market to sustain this boom. It's already selling to the rest of the world at a pace that makes one country's import ban look almost survivable, maybe even a rounding error. So sit with that for a second. The United States just used its most serious regulatory weapon, the same list, the same legal mechanism it used against Huawei against an entire category of Chinese technology. And the likely real-world outcome is that China barely notices, because it was never fully depending on America to begin with. It was already building the off-ramp before Washington even reached for the ban. That's not the story of a confident superpower flexing its power from a position of strength. That's closer to the story of a superpower trying to slow down a race it's already losing on cost, on volume, and on speed, using the only tool it has left that doesn't involve actually outbuilding the competition on the factory floor. Beijing clearly sees it that way too. China's foreign ministry pushed back almost immediately after the announcement, arguing that protectionism doesn't make the United States more competitive and ultimately only ends up hurting American companies and American consumers who might otherwise have access to cheaper, more capable hardware. That's not just routine diplomatic noise you can wave away, it's a direct challenge to the entire stated logic behind the ban, delivered within roughly a day of the announcement going public. And Beijing isn't just talking. The same week this ban landed, China's government was busy pointing to its own trade numbers as proof the strategy is working regardless of what Washington does. Officials framed the export surge in robotics and advanced manufacturing as evidence that China's industrial chain, its domestic market size, and its innovation pipeline are strong enough to absorb a single market closing its doors. Whether or not you buy the framing, the message being sent to the rest of the world is unmistakable. China is telling Europe, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and everyone else watching this unfold that it has plenty of customers lined up, even if the United States steps back. And there's one more wrinkle worth knowing, because it adds a darker layer underneath all of this. Unitree, the company sitting at the center of this entire story, has also landed on a separate Pentagon list of Chinese companies with alleged military ties, something the company has publicly and firmly disputed. Layer that on top of the FCC's covered list designation, and you start to see the fuller picture forming here. Two separate arms of the US government, one focused on communications infrastructure, one focused on defense, independently arrived at the same conclusion about the same company from two completely different angles. This isn't purely about consumer safety or abstract supply chain risk anymore. There's a real undercurrent of the US treating Chinese robotics as a potential military-adjacent technology, not just a commercial product you might buy for your warehouse or your factory floor. There's also a domestic angle worth sitting with because this ban doesn't just affect Chinese companies. It affects American businesses that wanted to buy this hardware in the first place. Warehouses, logistics companies, and manufacturers that were eyeing Chinese humanoids specifically because of their price point now have a much narrower set of options, at least for anything not already grandfathered in under existing approvals. If Unitree's $4,000 humanoid was genuinely on the table for American small and mid-sized businesses looking to automate without a 9-figure R&D budget, that option effectively just disappeared for anything new going forward. So part of the real cost of this ban isn't paid by China. It's paid by the American companies that just lost access to the cheapest hardware in the category, right as Chinese firms turn around and offer that exact same hardware to competitors in Europe and Asia instead. Which raises the real question hanging over this entire story. Is banning the hardware actually going to slow China down in any meaningful way? Or does it just accelerate the exact thing China has already been doing for the past decade, building its own self-sufficient supply chains, its own domestic capital markets, its own global customer base, so that it never needs an American on-ramp in the first place, for robots or for anything else that follows this same pattern? And it's worth remembering how the last few chapters of this exact playbook actually played out, because the US has run this move before and the results were mixed at best. The Huawei ban was supposed to cripple the company's global ambitions. Huawei lost access to American chips and software, took a real hit in international smartphone sales, and then quietly rebuilt its own chip supply chain domestically, emerging a few years later with homegrown processors that shocked plenty of analysts who assumed the company was finished. TikTok faced years of political pressure and forced divestiture fights in the US, while the app kept growing everywhere else in the world, largely undisturbed. The pattern so far is consistent. American bans tend to slow a Chinese company's US ambitions specifically, without meaningfully denting its global trajectory, and in some cases they even accelerate the exact kind of self-sufficiency Washington was trying to prevent in the first place. There's no obvious reason to assume humanoid robots break that pattern. Here's what to watch next, because the timing here is not a coincidence. Donald Trump is reportedly set to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping in September. This ban lands just weeks before that meeting, which makes the timing awfully hard to ignore if you're paying close attention. Is this a genuine, permanent national security position, the kind of policy that sticks around no matter who's sitting across the negotiating table when the cameras start rolling? Or is it a bargaining chip, something quietly designed to get softened, delayed, or walked back the moment both leaders actually sit down and start talking trade in September? Because if it's the second one, this whole story isn't really about robots at all. It's about leverage. And leverage only works if the other side genuinely needs what you're holding on to. Right now, with China selling working humanoids for the price of a used car, posting real profits doing it, and quietly redirecting its exports toward Europe and the rest of the world, it's worth asking plainly who actually needs whom more in this relationship. There's a broader pattern forming across the entire US-China tech relationship right now, and this ban is just the latest data point in it. Chips, EVs, drones, and now robots, one category after another, the same basic sequence keeps repeating itself. China builds manufacturing scale first, prices aggressively second, and dominates global market share third. all before Washington even finishes debating what to do about it. By the time a ban actually lands, the Chinese company in question has usually already built enough momentum, enough export diversity, and enough domestic financial backing to absorb the hit and keep moving. If that pattern holds one more time here, the real headline in a year probably won't be about America successfully protecting its market. It'll be about whether America managed to build a competitive humanoid robotics industry of its own in the window this ban bought it, or whether it spent that window arguing about the ban instead. We'll be watching exactly what happens when Trump and Xi sit down together in September, and whether this ban is even still standing by the time they do.